Roll call, please.
Chair Johnson.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Yang.
Here.
Councilmember Bowie.
Here.
Councilmember Coleman.
Here.
Councilmember Kim.
Here.
Councilmember Jost.
Here.
Councilmember Naker.
Here.
All present and no one absent.
Woo. Okay, so we have two presentations today. First up is the presentation on the tree canopy and right track program. So we'll start off I guess, is it tree forestry? The budget in front of me is missing one item, but we'll go first with the forestry presentation. Welcome, Rachel. And is it Joan Ward?
John Ward.
John Ward.
Thank
Hello,
you.
Ms. John Ward. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good.
Thank you for having me today, council members, to talk about our forestry budget. I'm going to give you a brief outlook on where we are currently and where we'll be in the future based on our current budget and an optimal budget. And I will rely on my notes, so I apologize if I'm looking down a lot. Okay, so I thought it was important to start with kind of who we are and what we do in forestry. During budget presentations and a lot of the city council presentations, I understand that you typically will see like the big bucket items of pruning, tree removal, and planting. But I wanted to point out some of the other important work that we do in forestry. Grant management is one big thing. We currently have 3 grants that we are managing in the forestry division with the U.S. Forest Service and the DNR. Community forestry, we don't have a dedicated fund for outreach in forestry, but we do work collaboratively with private nonprofits on public and private tree planting initiatives. We host events such as Arbor Day, and we have a small team of volunteers called the Tree Stewards who do pruning and planting for us. We currently have 1 urban forester who reviews all public construction and development projects in St. Paul, including anything that Public Works is doing, Ramsey County, MnDOT, St. Paul Regional Water Service, and then all of the private development. That individual provides feedback and requirements for tree preservation and removals, tree planting, etc. Our crews also help with those projects by pruning trees in advance in as much as our capacity for that work allows. Often those projects are planted by our contractor with forestry oversight. Storm response is another big thing that forestry does. I know you probably know over the last week we've had several small storms. That work has generated well over 200 calls to our office for trees that are down, tree branches that are down. So we've been working through all of that. And I think it's worth noting that the storm response is something that is entirely unbudgeted for forestry. Oops, I forgot that I'm changing slides too. Okay. So where we are with budgets and then pressures. In the general fund, we did have a small increase in 2025 of $500,000. Otherwise, my understanding, going back a couple of decades, is that that budget has remained relatively level with the exception of increases for salaries and fringes. Historically, it's been a pretty under-resourced in comparison to the workload that we have. For EAB, it was, so if you go back to Dutch elm disease days, back in the 1970s, there was a ton of federal funding to cities and states to help with Dutch elm disease. And that really never came to fruition with emerald ash borer, although it is just as devastating of an insect versus disease. There were some state and federal grants that we have been awarded throughout the EAB years, but not, the millions that were needed for the program. The city did start a general fund for EAB management back, I think, around 2010 or 11, but overall, it was less than half of what was spent on managing EAB in St. Paul. Staffing wasn't increased substantially, so backlogs were created that we're still working our way out of. For our capital improvement budget, that has remained level since before I started working here, which was around 2004. So I'll get more into that a little bit later as far as the planting that budget covers. The Port Authority funds that came in, I think 2021 or so, was an $18 million package over 6 years. And that was to complete the EAB program, which we did in 2024. And it has allowed us to start addressing some of the backlogs as well as purchasing some needed equipment for our crews. Our accessible removals budget, and I'm really not going to talk about this a whole lot later in the presentation, but if you have questions on it, then we can take those. It's right now is $100,000 annually, and I don't know of any increases to that budget, but that basically is the budget that is used to resolve any private property abatements in the city. So it goes back to the Dutch elm disease days when the city was marking trees on private property that were diseased and dead from Dutch elm disease. And we're now using it primarily to address emerald ash borer infested dead trees. But the need well surpasses the budget there. Grants, like I said, we currently have 3 grants, and we've received varying levels of grant funds over the years since I've worked here. It is in the millions, but it's not funding that we've been able to consistently rely on because there is a lot of competition in the state for the small amount of grant funding that's available for urban and community forestry. And just kind of for a comparison, the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board manages about the same amount in terms of tree numbers and the size of the city, and their funding is about twice what ours is, as well as staffing capacity. I think they have around 90 staff where we have 42 in forestry, 43 maybe. And I believe their budget is around $9 to $10 million per year. So despite all of that, it's good to have goals, right? So when we got the Port Authority funding, we wrapped up EAB management, but part of the process when looking at the port funding was to develop goals associated with the backlogs that were created during our management of emerald ash borer. So we looked at what we could achieve once those funds were exhausted with sustained general fund dollars. The ultimate goal being to reestablish lost canopy citywide, increase species diversity, and maintain both established and young replacement trees. And so those goals did include, as you can see, establishing a pruning cycle and establishing a 3-year tree replacement program citywide. So we would be looking at, if a tree came down due to the storm last week, that we would grind the stump next year, and then in 2028, we would be replanting a tree there. And I'll get more into all of those things as I go along. So for pruning, like I said before, I've been with this city for close to 20 years, and the first time we've established an actual pruning cycle was in 2024, immediately following the EAB management program. Prior to that, I think we did say that we had anywhere from a 12 to a 15-year cycle, but that was really all complaint-based. So we might be on a street pruning all of the trees 1 year and say we might get back in 12 years, but it really wasn't doing a systematic pruning of individual areas. I think, as we all know, complaint-based management of programs is not really equitable and it's not sustainable. It's also, in terms of forestry, it's not good for trees. So routine pruning is really the #1 thing that we can do to care for our trees in the city. It helps with storm resilience by removing overextended, so long branches or structurally weak limbs. It increases airflow, so if you see trees, even young trees waving around in the air, if you prune out some of the limbs, it will let airflow go through so that it doesn't snap the tree off. It increases health and longevity by removing dead and dying limbs, increasing airflow again, which decreases fungal growth, and redirecting energy to healthy new growth. It also helps with risk management and mitigation. We have clearer sight lines so that people aren't running stop signs, and tree branches aren't touching roofs or structures, and damaging the exterior of homes or buildings. So when we started thinking about what a pruning program could look like back in 2020-ish, and knowing that there's not really an absolute industry standard, but that 5 to 10 years is generally accepted throughout the industry, we used our tree inventory to split the city into 50 small areas with the goal of reaching 5 per year. And that the thought process behind that is, that we would be on a 10-year cycle. We have 5 crews. They would reach one of those. Each crew would reach one of their areas in a given year, and they would go through 10 years, and then the 10 years later, they would be back doing those same areas. So you can see what we completed over the last couple of years, and we do have the 2026, which is year 3 of the program, is in progress. In 2024, there was some funding to support contractor assistance for this work. Long term, it could have cut the first 10-year cycle in half, down to 5 years. However, that funding wasn't sustained, and since then it's been 100% in-house crews doing the work. Excuse me. So like I said, we are meeting the goals of the program thus far.
We do have a quick question from Councilmember Kim, so I'll go to her at this time.
Thank you. Sorry, you're on a roll. What I believe I heard you say was these were determined based on the current understanding of what trees are where. What's my question? I'm trying to determine, how did you determine on these, kind of based on your knowledge of the diversity of trees that we have in the city? Because even when I look at, even the lower part of Rice Street, kind of near the graveyard, that I was living in that area and every single tree on my block was taken down for EAB.
Sure.
I don't know if it was we were part of the protective border or so I'm just kind of wondering, are those considerations being made as you think about where you're kind of prioritizing your plan based on where EAB has been, where you were taking down trees? How do those connect at all, and how did you make a decision around where you were going next?
Sure. So the way that we generated the prune areas was really looking mainly at the number of trees in each area to try to make it as even as possible. So you'll see some really strange, squiggle in and out type of thing on that. And it generally, in all of those small areas, it's around 2,500 trees. We've done ash replacements everywhere, and I will talk about the young trees a little bit more, but we've done them everywhere. We also did look at the age diversity in each area, so how many young trees there were versus older trees. But in general, it's pretty much citywide. There's a good mix, but I will talk a little bit about the younger tree and pruning with those. Does that answer your question? Okay. So where I was, we have been meeting the goals of the 10-year pruning cycle over the last 2.5 years. We have a really good start this year. We've gotten most of our pruning done for the year. However, we will have to go back and finish that up, and that will depend on how many trees come down this summer, either just due to, age, death, whatnot, and then the storms that we see throughout the year. We also have been addressing prioritized complaints such as trees blocking stop signs and touching houses, and we've done a lot of construction-related requests early this year. And this is where I'll get to the butts of the program. Constituents could wait well over 10 years to have a tree pruned. If you're accounting for trees that were planted before we started the routine pruning cycle, and depending on which prune zone they're in. So the prune zone 1 is what we did, is year 1. Prune zone 10 is year 10. So if a tree was planted in 2020 and they're in prune zone 10, they could wait, 14, 15 years to have a tree pruned. And I think we all know that means continued complaints, right, about where we are in our cycle and how long it's taking. This doesn't include formative pruning, to your question, Councilmember Kim, of young trees. There are now tens of thousands of those because we've been replacing ash trees, replacing storm damaged trees, and everything else. We should actually have a separate program for structural pruning of young trees, where they're pruned 2 to 3 times in the first 10 years. That is somewhat of an industry standard, where, if you have a pruning cycle of anything between 5 to 10 years, that is considered good. But for young trees, it really is that you're getting to them at least a couple of times while they're young, so that you're giving them a really good structure for their growth. This also doesn't include park trees. So we are the Parks Department, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of capacity to do a lot of maintenance in parks. So this does, the prune zones, the 2,500 trees that I mentioned is really just street trees. And if we get areas done early, we would go into parks and do as much pruning in those areas as we could. So for a budget need, I think this was presented, this graphic, by Andy last week, I'm pretty sure, by Director Rodriguez. An ideal scenario would include roughly $3.7 million annually in additional funding to support pruning contracts. We would have the capacity, and that's included in that ideal number that is circled in red. We'd then have the capacity to expedite the first round of the cycle, reducing it from 10 years down to 7. I think that's like what would be achievable now that we're already into year 3 of the pruning. It would just address backlogs of complaints. It would keep us up on construction-related pruning needs, develop a program for structural pruning of young trees, and complete park pruning during the same year's cycle.
I see a question as well from Council President Naker.
Thanks, Chair. Sure. Can you give us a sense of how the $6.3 million for general tree care breaks down? And you mentioned staff. I'm curious how many staff we have, what else the money goes toward. And then can you speak a little bit about what the expectations or the metrics are for staff, like per week or month or day? Like, how are we setting expectations to get a certain amount of this work done that meets our goals?
Sure. I do have pull out some other information. So your question is for the base 6.29 million, is that
Yeah, I see the sort of sources here, but I'm curious what the uses are. Like how is this money being used? And then sort of a second question is for just staff expectation, what is the average or ideal amount that a crew can perform in any one of these areas?
Sure.
And how do we measure that?
So the roughly $6 million in general fund. Right now, 4.5 million, roughly 4.5 is staff and salaries and fringe benefits. That leaves us with around $1 million for what is included in like supplies, services, materials. So that's any contract work that we do. So we do contract out our planting program, and we do contract out our stump removal program. And those are the two like bigger ticket items that come out of our budgets. And then we have, just smaller contract work such as crane removals, which I'll touch a little bit on later, that assist with our crews doing their routine work. We have some trainings that are required for forestry staff annually, so like smaller things like that, safety equipment, which you'd be surprised by, how much equipment is needed to do this type of work. So I think right now for 2027, if we stuck with the budget that we currently have, our planting program, we would use roughly $450,000 of our general fund would supplement planting, which I'm going to talk about next, is how the budgets with the planting work. And then roughly the same amount for stump grinding, which leaves a little bit left over for the miscellaneous, trainings and equipment that we need for our programs. We are increasing some of the work that we do with the grant funding that we have right now. So, for instance, the Forest Service grant that I mentioned, there is a small amount of that is going towards stump grinding. Next year, around $300,000 of that will go towards tree planting. And then our capital improvement, the $330,000 budget, that goes towards tree planting. So the majority of general fund does go towards salaries and fringe benefits. That is, I think we're at 42 or 43 staff. So there's myself, we have 2 other supervisors in forestry who's really, they're supervising our crews that are doing all of the work that you see getting done. There are 5 crew leaders and 26 arborists that are responsible for all of the pruning, all of the removals that we're doing, which again, like removals, I'll talk about a little bit. Those are really done in-house. We contract out very little in terms of removal work. As far as, and then we have our like professional side where the technicians, we have 4 technicians in forestry and 5 urban foresters. The urban foresters are overseeing different programs, such as our planting program, park tree inventory and management. So we have 1 urban forester who's doing the park trees. Doing inspections in parks, making sure that we're keeping up on the minimal amount of work that we can do in parks. We have a forester, like I talked about before, who does all the construction-related work. And then we have 2 foresters who kind of have split the city in half, who are doing all of the general inspections of our street trees. And they're also doing all the private property abatement work. So if they're going onto private property to mark trees. And the 4 technicians we have support our customer service. So they're taking turns answering phones specifically for forestry that are routed to them, and assisting with all of those other programs, and then running some of their own smaller programs and helping with grants that or partnerships for grants. In terms of what is expected of a daily workload, it really varies, based on what they're doing for the day. So if they're doing removals for a crew, it could be that they're removing 50 small trees or 2 large trees, right? So it varies pretty significantly. As far as the pruning work goes, I think crews were generally completing, and I don't know if I have the numbers off the top of my head, but they've been going pretty well and probably pruning around 100 trees per crew per week, I think. So they have been getting through that work pretty efficiently. And the routine pruning program, I think where it varies pretty significantly from the complaint-based, as I'm sure you'd understand, is if we get a complaint for one tree, we are going to go and resolve that one tree. We're not going to say, oh, every other tree on the block is also low, we should do this too, because it kind of is never ending at that point. So to go into an area and prune every tree on the street at once or within a short time frame is really a much more efficient way of going about the work. Does that answer?
Yeah, I really appreciate just kind of the deep dive. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Coleman just to see if her question was answered in that, or if she had a follow-up.
I have a follow-up. Thanks, Chair, and thank you so much for the presentation. It's super helpful. We get a lot of questions about trees. I'm curious, so it's very interesting to me that we haven't previously had a budget for storm contingency, thinking about a week like last week, where I assumed that was a ton of the work was storm cleanup. So I'm just curious how that plays out. Is that then, do we end up spending more than budgeted for? Is it that other work isn't getting done when we have big storms? If we have a super stormy summer, that just sort of throws us off on every other metric. And then the second part of the question is sort of looking to, if we were able to add that $1 million budget for 2027, curious how that would be spent. Would it be more staff? Would it be more equipment? What would that look like?
Sure. Thank you for the question. To your first question, I think all of the above. It does throw our schedule off, obviously. It also can generate, hundreds. I think last year with the storm in late July, and it didn't help that there was also a cyber attack, I think, like the week of. So that made it a little more difficult to resolve issues. But that was close to, I think it was close to 1,000 calls. So numbers of trees, obviously for removals increases during the year. It can pose issues if you're trying to stay on a pruning cycle. It definitely impacts the budget in terms of all of the overtime that is done. So when we have a large storm like that, even the storm last week, our crews did work until I think 7 p.m. So if we have a large storm, they are working, 12-hour days at least, which there's overtime involved, and potentially on weekends, depending on the size. We do have contractors assist, which then it's kind of up to people like Dave over there to try to find money within the park's budget to pay for contracted work. And we're typically looking at contractors helping with things like park trees, because on our kind of list of priorities, parks come in towards the bottom of the list when we're trying to clear streets for emergency vehicles, get trees off of cars and houses. So the park trees are kind of at the bottom. So we'd have contractors help with that. We, depending on the size of the storm, we have contractors hauling material. So we might set up a number of marshalling yards or dump sites where we would have contractors then hauling all of that material down to Pig's Eye, because it's more efficient for us to drop it at Como Park if we're working in the Como Park area than to drive all the way down to Pig's Eye to dump loads of material down there. So it's kind of a variety, and I think the $1 million, we've looked back at storms in the past, and the larger storms have cost that much. So I think the 1 million mark would be for a large storm, but just to have that funding available if there was storm damage. We've also had a few storms, I think, since I've been here where it was a large enough storm that the city decided that we needed to expedite tree planting, for instance, for those areas that were hit hardest, or I know of at least one storm where we did haul all private brush along with the public brush, which is a lot because people do take advantage of that and will have every tree on their property pruned and put it on the boulevard for us to haul. So it varies, I think, by storm, but that's kind of what it would assist with.
Thank you.
All right, so for tree planting, let's see. So our objectives now for planting are increasing diversity, incorporating climate-adapted species, increasing canopy in underrepresented areas, and utilizing volunteers for work with that. I mentioned grants earlier, and that we have three, but two of them are planting-related grants. They prioritize plantings in underrepresented areas. Our DNR grant is a one-time funding which will support around 560 trees being planted this fall. And then the Forest Service grant that we have is a 5-year program. It includes a job training component. So we are still working with Tree Trust. We had been for the 5 years before that to do a job training program, and the job that they do is tree planting. That also supports a bit of stump removal work. And like I said earlier, oh no, this is something different, sorry. These grants typically also have requirements for diversity and climate adaptive species. And like I said, those are all things that we're already doing, but they typically work pretty well for the planting that we're doing to supplement those programs.
And Miss Joan Ward. Is it Joan Ward?
You got it.
Joan Ward, okay. I saw, before we get too far into the tree planting, I just want to go back to Councilmember Kim's question.
I appreciate it. They're like not connected questions, but connected to different slides. So my first question is around the last slide around increasing canopy in underrepresented areas, and so how it connects to your pruning schedule. So you said each area is about 2,500 trees, and some areas are larger than others. So for example, like looks like zone 10, right, is quite large in comparison to like zone 2, right, like northwest Como. And I just sort of wonder, like, is another way to look at this map, is it also an indicator of the tree canopy coverage as well? Like, given the fact that like zone 10 is so much larger than other zones, and if every zone has 2,500 trees, are we to then like infer that in that area the tree canopy is lower? Like, does that kind of connect to our tree equity score or canopy scores across the city, or am I thinking just like way too deep into it?
Maybe a little too deep, but in terms of canopy, we don't know what our canopy percentages are in neighborhoods right now. I know that there are like national calculators out there, but we do, one of the grants that I mentioned is it's through the DNR, and I should have the contract back hopefully today, and that will support a new urban tree canopy assessment, which is really needed. We did one in 2010, and so the goal would be to do one yet this year. And that would go down to the neighborhood and even the individual property to show the canopy percentages, and then to develop an urban forest management plan. So we would look at that. I think that the size of the area more is an indicator of, if there's properties, there's some more industrial areas, right? Like down in District 3, you'll see a really large area, and that's because the airport's down there and it's more industrialized and there's larger lots and not as many boulevard trees. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily the size of the tree or the amount of canopy in an area.
Okay.
reason that we split it into 50 small areas into those crews is that then we are working throughout the city every year. We're not focusing on, prune zone 1 through 5 is all on this side of the city. So we're working kind of all over the place every year.
Yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate it. Yeah, because the tree assessment, the canopy study was something that I have a reference to, but now it sounds like is outdated, so it'd be good to update it.
Yep.
The other question that I had was sort of related to like the staffing question, but also recognizing like your staff have gone through like EAB and you're like fighting against this like massive tree disease, and while also trying to increase the biodiversity of the canopy and the existing like forestry that we have, and all the stumping. And it sounds like not even within our parks. So it sounds like maybe even in our parks department, there are forestry staff as well. So it's just trees on trees on trees. So my question is really related to staffing. So even recognizing like when a surge of a storm happens, like the one that we saw very recently and the one that we had in Como last year, like entire trees were like chopped in half or split apart. That amount of work is incredibly cumbersome. I'm wondering, and this doesn't have to be a today question, but I am sort of interested in sort of the like turnover or like attrition of your staff given the demands. Like what I'm hearing this entire time is that you're understaffed, sort of not as well equipped as you'd like to be to respond to like storms. What does that look like for your staff numbers? How have they been changing year over year? And then the other thought, so that doesn't have to be answered now, and the other thought for my colleagues, which I think we're all on the same page on, is if we plan for a certain number of snow emergencies every single year in the Public Works Department, what would it look like for us to plan for a certain number of major storms for a forestry department? So would just be sort of interested in having that discussion with my colleagues. But feel free to follow up on the staffing question another time. But thank you.
I can now. I think, for, like I said, the professional side, there's not a lot of turnover. I think that we have, if we post a position for a technician or a forester, we have at least 50 candidates and a strong candidate pool, and people in general, I think, in that group really do love working here. We've had like one forester leave in the last 10 years. So on the labor side, I think it is a little bit, it's more in flux. We had, when I started in this position in 2018, we had a pretty large group of people who had been here for a long time, and they slowly, a lot of retirements happened over the first few years, and then COVID. And so we have had a bit more turnover in that group, but it's honestly been, maybe a couple of people per year, and they have left for various reasons. So I haven't heard from anyone in that group that it's because they hate their job and they feel like they're overworked. In general, I would say the opposite. People typically will come here from the private sector, where they might be working 12-hour days all summer, and then in the winter they might not have as much work. So it's a more consistent schedule. And we do make it very clear during the hiring process that storms happen, and when they do, the expectation is that staff are available. So does that answer that question? Okay, great. All right, so with a little bit with our planting numbers and where we are with those, the port funding, again, it was an opportunity for us to kind of close the gap on some backlogs that were created by EAB management. I think a few years ago, we probably had close to 10,000 vacant sites. We're moving into 2027 with about 4,300 vacant sites. So we have had the capacity to reduce that backlog pretty significantly over the last few years. 2023 through 25, we averaged about 4,700 trees planted per year. This year it will be a bit less, and that's including grant funding. And what we're looking at for 2027, is planting roughly 2,000 trees. So that is, anticipating that our funding would support planting less than half the number of trees that we would like to in order to close that gap. The chart that is up there basically shows those numbers. The yellow is annual planting numbers under current funding. Green is planting under optimal funding. And so you see the large green bar for 2027, and that is really trying to close that gap as much as possible. And then it fluctuates a little bit year by year based on the current grant funds that we do have, both for this year and then for a few years with the Forest Service. But it generally would level out in 2028, planting roughly 1,800 trees per year, and that would again be on that, getting us onto that 3-year cycle of removal, 1 year stump grinding, and then planting. So budget need there.
I see a hand from Council President Naker.
I might answer it here, but
a
go
hand
ahead.
indeed.
Well, thank you. I'm just trying to figure out why our numbers have been going down since 2023. Are we investing less every year? Do we have fewer partnerships?
Yeah, so 2023, we had port funding. So that kind of allowed us to use a fair amount of our general fund to supplement our planting program. And that was we really had those funds through 2025. And then 2026, we're looking at 3,500 this year, and that's really putting all of our budgets, all the money that we have anywhere together to get to that 3,500 number.
And so then why so many fewer in 27?
Because 2026, we did have some funding from 25 that we used for spring planting this year.
Just sort of a general question. Have we ever been caught up? I mean, so like, I ask this, and that's not a flippant question, but in general, because I think when I started on the council, we were in the midst of EAB, and the understanding I had was that it was because of EAB that all of our resources were going there, so they were sucking up all the time and attention from everything else. And sort of underneath that was the implication that, like, therefore, if that went away, we would be able to do everything else. I'm just curious, like, has it ever been the case in time that we have been on the right tree planting cycle, pruning cycle, stumping cycle? And if so, how was that possible?
Yeah.
And if not, it doesn't make me feel any better, but I'm just wondering.
No, I understand. No, I don't think we have. So for planting, I think the best we've done is a 5-year cycle. So, and the cycle really being that, not necessarily that your tree was removed 5 years ago and we're going to replant it, but we do most of our work by planning district, right? So efficiency wise, we're going into a district every 5 years. So that's the best that I know of that we stayed on for planting. Stump grinding, and I will hit on it a little bit, but there wasn't a stump program when I started working here. They had stopped it probably around 2000-ish, and then I think we started it back up in 2011, and so we started grinding all of the stumps from the previous 10 years. And like I talked about with pruning, we really haven't had a pruning cycle before. It largely has been complaint-based. They might have had one, back when I was in college, so I don't really know the numbers, but if they did, it was over 20 years ago, so it's not valid.
Thank you.
So, and to your question of have we been on track with planting, I think Where we've gotten off of track really is that the CIB budget hasn't changed from that $330,000. What has changed is the average cost of a tree being planted. When I was here back in 2006 as an intern, the cost of a tree planted with a 1-year warranty was $175, and now it's $450. So where you were getting, 1,900 trees maybe annually, we're now getting around 700 out of that budget. Like I talked about a little bit, general fund has really been the bulk of our planting program over the last few years, but with it going back basically to pre-EAB levels, there's not a lot in the general fund to go towards planting, and that's why that number next year goes down. So the optimal budget again includes a $1.5 million increase in CIB, which is really what's needed to sustain a planting program. It's probably worth pointing out on the graph here, the chart, that if it remains at the level that we are at right now, so if we have the 4,300 ish kind of vacant sites, we would reduce that a little bit over the next couple of years with what we have and with the grant funds, but then it would pretty quickly go back up to the same number. So we would be looking at planting at a deficit. So for tree and stump removal, we mark trees throughout the year. The bulk of them are marked in the summer during our annual citywide survey. Our goal for tree removal is always to get them removed by the end of the year. If they're marked in 2026, we'll get the majority of them down in 2026. There might be a couple of stragglers that we need assistance from a crane company on. But it is primarily in-house work that is done that way. And I looked back at our average removal numbers over the last 10 years, and it's roughly 1,800 trees per year. For stumps, like I mentioned, we were able to, or maybe I didn't, we were able to get caught up on stumps last year on the backlog that we had. That was due to the assistance of the port funding and the Forest Service funding that we have. So all right-of-way and park stumps that we had in the system were removed in 2025, regardless of what tree or what year they were removed. I think we did a lot of stumps for trees that we had removed in 2025 as well, just to try to get ahead. This year we're removing stumps from 2025 removals, and we would continue to do the same. This work is primarily accomplished through contractors. We have multiple contracts for stump grinding, just to keep up on them and to increase capacity there. So the budget need for that, for tree removal, questions?
We have like 3. So I'm like going through, I'm like, okay. I saw Vice Chair Yang, and then we'll go Councilmember Coleman, Councilmember Bowie.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I wanted to ask questions just on the slide about tree and stump removal. And then also it sort of overlaps with the slides you have about the budget. I know in the past we had that partnership with the port and between the port and St. Paul Parks and Rec to do, I believe, the stump removals. I'm not sure if pruning was a part of that, so can you clarify if pruning was indeed a part of the responsibilities there? And I know in terms of the budget slides here, it doesn't have that partnership continued, and I'm wondering if you believe that, as a department, you all believe that partnership, or extending or starting up that partnership again would be helpful in us trying to get on track with our work.
Sure. So for the question of pruning, I believe with port funding, it has to be a capital expense, and pruning is maintenance, so it's not included in that. And as far as the continuation of port funding, I might defer to our OFS director on that question.
Okay, great, thank you. And I just wanted to share too, I'm very supportive of the partnership. I've asked or mentioned to Director Rodriguez that I would love to see us continue it. And yeah, thank you for the clarification about the pruning.
Chair Johnson, Councilmember Yang, Joe Harney, Director of the Office of Financial Services. If the council and the city would like to pursue further additional partnership with the port, I think it's worth talking about two phases that we would need to go through. The first would be understanding the debt capacity for the general obligation levy, and the second would be sort of the legislative mechanics that would need to be adopted for that to occur after that analysis. That would start with a declaration of intent from the Port Board of Commissioners that would require an ordinance change authorizing the bond sale. We had a joint powers agreement for this in 2021. It's my opinion that we should do a new joint powers agreement if we pursue this further, since it's been 5 years. And then last would be a budget amendment that would be required to go through, be presented to CIB. So those are just to avail you of some of the mechanics that inform that partnership, to know that it takes time, probably is the punchline there. Yeah.
Thank you. And then just the last question for me, I'm wondering if you can explain the role that Tree Trust played in any of the work here around pruning or the stump removals. At one point they were here and presented to us. And so I really love their work. I was a part of Tree Trust when I was younger too. And so I would love to hear an update about that if you have any.
Sure. So the project that they're working on for us, and this is a continuation of what was done during the Port Authority funding, is that they are planting trees. So the primary project is planting trees, and then there's just general tree maintenance included in that, such as, and it's really going back to those trees that they've planted to, if there's any needs as far as staking the tree goes, watering, mulching, those types of things. They aren't doing any pruning for us. They are not doing stump grinding. So it's basically tree planting.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Coleman, and then just for a time check, we're at about 10:53.
Yeah.
We will wrap at 11, and so I want to leave the room for the presentation. But before we go to Councilmember Coleman and Bowie, let's finish your last two slides.
Okay. So stump removal, basically it's including, the optimal budget is including roughly $500,000 annually to support the stump grinding program. If there weren't additional funds, stump grinding numbers would drop in 2029 based on, the funding available and the exhaustion of the Forest Service funds. And we would start having a backlog of stumps. Sorry, I was on the wrong slide because I went back one. So what does this all mean? I think to wrap it up, for pruning, I went through that we could have a better pruning program, both in terms of cycle, hitting parks, reducing that first cycle going through the city, and better resources for our young trees to get those pruned structurally in the first 10 years. And I think a continuation of complaints would be expected if we stay on the cycle that we're on. I know there's thousands of very low trees throughout the city right now, and I know that you all get a lot of those complaints, and I just know we're doing the best we can with it to get on track. For planting, we could be on it. I think we could really achieve the 3-year cycle with if funding was available. So I would love to get on that. I think that a lot of people that we hear from expect that if a tree was removed one day, that the stump would either come out that same day or the next, and that a tree be planted, the next season. And that's not going to be accomplished. And I don't feel that it's a realistic expectation for a city of our size to be on that type of a program. But I think that a 3-year replacement program would be beneficial. And for stump removal, we could do the same. We stay on that program and get everything done within that 3 years. I think for all of the other important work that we do that I didn't really get a chance to talk about, our group is really good at doing what we can with what we have and the resources we have available, and we make the most of it. And we have a great group that is, really proud of the resource that we manage and proud of the work that they do. And I think we could just do more with more. So with that, I would just like to say thank you for having me, and I can take some of the last questions that you have.
Okay, yeah, we'll wrap with Councilmember Coleman and then Councilmember Bowie's questions. And as a follow-up for folks that have additional questions, please feel free to reach out as well. And I saw some folks already have, so you'll have some additional follow-up questions and thoughts too from council members. But thank you for being here too.
Echoing the thanks. Really quickly, just to understand that it is not realistic for our city of our size to do tree removal one day, stump grinding the next day, new tree on the third day. Are there reasons other than budgetary that we wouldn't do that? Like, could that be something we did if we had an unlimited budget or would want to do?
I don't know. I would have to think about that one and how you would do that. It really, it's entirely different equipment. It does take time on our end after a removal is done. We actually we do measure all of the stumps that are out there, because that is how the contractors bill us, and we're not relying on them to tell us the size of the stump that they're grinding. So there is work involved in that. And, you can only do stump removal from May to November. So you're never really going to be able to do it all in that same time frame, because you have 6 months out of the year where you can't grind stumps. Same with planting. We have 2 seasons that are pretty quick for Minnesota. So.
And Councilmember Bowie.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, particularly more so, just focus on more of the workflow management in terms of volumes of calls that comes through for complaints. As you can imagine, as a council member, especially in Ward 1, I get a lot of flagging of complaints that's been sent to forestry, where people have shared that they've been told that there's a backlog of nearly a decade, or their tree stump in their boulevard. It's been years and just hasn't been they've escalated, but it has not been confirmed in terms of removal. So I'm just curious to know what is the volume of complaints that comes in versus the volume of work orders that go out. If we can have some type of tracking of that, just because I think as we're talking about just the budget, I really would want to know, just in terms of staff capacity, what is the return of our investment in terms of increasing this budget will help us accomplish getting more trees removed, or accomplish solving some of these complaints that are coming in.
Sure. I think I'll have to look at the numbers, but I do know because we did meet with the mayor's office or constituent services group, I think, earlier this year. So we did put some numbers together for volume of calls that we receive. I think in the summer months, which is, we do get more calls in the summer, it was definitely in the hundreds per month. It tails off during the dead of winter. I think in terms of our capacity, a lot of the complaints that you're likely getting are from the folks who have been told, you know, your tree was removed last year and we're going to be removing the stump next year, and they're the ones who might want it removed, expect that it would be removed within a month of the tree removal, for instance, or the planting cycle at this time, is that we aren't going to be with the funding that we'll have in 2027, we won't have much of a planting cycle. At best, it's going to be maybe a 5-year rotation, partially planting districts, right? So I think those are the types of continued complaints, as well as the pruning cycle that you would continue to get. And it's not that we're not logging those, it's that we, again, don't have the capacity to do everything in a given year or season.
I just got a follow-up question. I appreciate that context. I wanted to just focus more on like trees that are actually like nuisance type of trees, like very dangerous trees. Like we have limbs that's like falling on like houses, are like a tree that just, due to the storm, it has fell over. And I'm just curious to know, like, is there a policy, or does our ordinance, requires us to attend to those trees within a time frame? Because those are some of the complaints that I've been receiving. I'm not to treat this as a Ward 1 complaint, constituent service, but I'm just really curious, because that's some of the feedback that I get, is that it has to go into the inventory. Just to hear that there is like a 1-year survey of those trees. Is there a different type of response when there are like more emergency based, trees, like particularly around, like weather, or if we see a tree that may not have, been called in, but it has like visible like risks to the neighborhood?
I think I understand. So for storm-related work, I don't think that there's a good way of anticipating what tree will have storm damage, right? If there's 80 mile to 90 mile to 100 mile an hour winds, we don't know which trees are going to fail. A lot of them don't have any exterior signs of decay, right? It's just the wind hit it and it got taken down. I think for complaints related to hazardous trees, the evaluation of a tree to deem it hazardous is really something that I think I would leave up to our professional forestry staff, who do have training in risk assessment with trees and evaluating a tree for risk, versus, we do get calls all the time from people saying, well, this tree is a hazard because it did drop a limb in a storm. That doesn't necessarily make the tree a hazard. A large storm may have gone through and broken hundreds of branches off of healthy trees, and that's something that does happen during storm events. So we do evaluate trees. If someone does call in for an inspection of a given tree or trees, that is part of the urban forester's jobs, is to go out and evaluate a tree. I think oftentimes property owners may just not like our resulting inspection details, which is that it's not necessarily that the tree is a hazard. It may need pruning. But again, I think we understand as much as anyone else, every tree in the city does need to be pruned. And that's what we're trying to be more proactive about, is to get on a cycle where we can accomplish some of that work so that those types of things don't happen in the future.
I appreciate that too. And I think just really, as we think about the work that the forestry team does, I just, want to share that we have talked on the council, and for a few years since I've been here, tree canopy and the tree planting, the pruning piece, just overall volume of our tree canopy has continued to be a priority on the council, and so it's one of the reasons why we asked you to be here today, and I think it's been really helpful. I think there'll be probably follow-ups that we may reach out to, and would that be for you that we reach out to the follow-up questions if folks have more in-depth questions like what Councilmember Bowie was asking, or if there are certain things on the slides that we didn't see but we want to know more about, would that be for a question for you?
That is a good question. I'm not sure how the department would want that routed. I'm looking at you, Erica, since you're.
I would say send it to Director Rodriguez, and you can include Rachel as well.
Yeah, we'll send it to the both of you.
Okay.
Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you.
We're going to pivot over to the Right Track team. Just one of the things that really prompted bringing them forward was more so to hear about, we've had a lot of conversations, especially regarding youth wages, and also just hearing more about the workforce that you have, and wanted to be able to give it the time that it was due. So thank you, Nardos, and thank you, Carlo, for both being here.
Thank you for having us both here. We'll try to be as quickly as possible, or move as quickly as possible. I know we are short on time. So as you all know, Right Track is the City of St. Paul's Youth Employment and Training Program, really targeted at creating career exposure opportunities for St. Paul youth with barriers to employment. The program is designed around 4 key outcomes. So first is to develop workplace readiness skills, such as communication, teamwork, and problem solving. Second is to expose youth to careers and industries that may not otherwise be accessible. Third, to build relationships with caring adults and to develop that network. And the fourth, to earn income while developing their financial capabilities. Really quick, I'm going to show you all the Right Track team. So this is the team that carries forward all of the work, ranging from the youth recruitment, employer engagement, trainings, and program management. We're especially proud of the five team members with asterisks next to their names because they are all program alumni. And their presence reflects the long-term impact of the program and demonstrates how investing in young people today can lead to future leaders in our community. With that foundation, I'll just quickly give an overview of our key programs. So one of Right Track's strengths is we know it's not a one-size-fits-all experience in youth force readiness, workforce readiness experiences. So we ensure that we have different levels of experiences and different opportunities for a young person to engage. The first being our YJ1 program, which really focuses on foundational skills for youth who are often entering the workforce for the first time through subsidized positions with libraries, parks, small businesses, and nonprofits. The second program being our YJ2 program, which expands on those foundational skills for young folks slightly older, so 16 to 21. And in this program, we partner with partners across the industries, so public, private, nonprofit, and these support young folks do a deeper dive into specific career paths they may be interested in. And then next we have our Public Pathways push. So as you all know, the public sector is the largest employer in St. Paul, but often that workforce doesn't reflect the residents it serves. So we put a really intentional push behind this work the last few years. So we have YJ2 internships in most city departments. Some of you in this room also host interns, which we are greatly appreciative for. And we also have our Right Track Scholars program, which is in its second year. That's a college internship program. And our scholars here today, Kong, he is supporting our team with some data support, evaluation, and some of our training facilitation this summer, which we're really excited about. He's studying education at the U of M. All right, so together these opportunities create a progression of experiences from first jobs to career exploration to credential attainment, and ultimately a career pathway allowing us to support young people throughout their workforce journey. And I will pass it to Carlo quickly, who will share some of our 2025 program highlights.
Great. Yeah, before we kind of continue into 2026 and what that's bringing, we wanted to share just a little bit about some of our results from this past year. So during 2025, we had the opportunity to serve 1,024 young people throughout the city of St. Paul in 1,138 different internship experiences with 144 employers throughout our city. And then a few internships that existed in like Maplewood or kind of those surrounding suburbs. So every young person that's a part of our program has what the state would consider a barrier to employment, majority of them coming from a cost burden household, so meeting some level of income requirements. Although many other young people meet the program eligibility by having a disability, being behind in grade level, speaking English as a second language, being justice impacted, in foster care, and several other opportunities that qualify them for being a part of the Right Track program. One of the things that I just really want to highlight on here is we, of course, provide a zip code kind of breakdown of where young people are working or where they're coming from. And I think one of the things that we are really intentional about is really making sure that we're reaching out and making sure young people have access, primarily young people from most marginalized backgrounds in our city. And one other piece that I just really want to highlight before we move to the next slide is a little over $2.3 million in wages and stipends were earned by our young people in 2025, which is a significant number for our young people.
I'm going to hold questions and let them go through the presentation for it, just so we can get through it before 11:30. Sorry, Council President.
We're scrolling. Great. So just some additional highlights, and I'm not going to read through these, but I just want to be clear that our program collects significant amounts of data. So we collect data on youth experience, so hearing young people what their experience was, and they get to tell us information about how they experienced our program, but also program outcomes. And so hearing from supervisors about how they interacted and what their supports of the program interns were and continue to be. And as you can see here, these are numbers that I would say we certainly compare to other local workforce programs, and take pride in knowing that our young people are leaving with skills, that they are leaving feeling a part of a team that they were a part of for the summer, and they are learning, and they're feeling as if things are useful in their kind of forward progression within these programs. And of course, just before we move to the next slide, that they are truly contributing, learning and contributing to meaningful work experiences at each site that they're a part of.
Thank you. All right, so next we'll jump into our budget overview. So when we look at how Right Track invests in its resources, the overwhelming majority of funding goes directly towards creating opportunities for young people. 59% of all program expenses support youth wages. I definitely skipped the slide, backtracking a little bit. So our total budget is comprised of city, foundation, and other government supports. So Right Track operates with a total budget of approximately $2.9 million, supported through a combination of funding sources. One key takeaway from this slide is while Right Track is a city program, majority of our funding does not come directly from the city. Just over 12% of the budget comes from the city through direct general fund allocations and a transfer from Parks General Fund. Approximately 7% comes from foundation and partnership support, including investments from St. Paul Minnesota Foundation, the NBA Foundation, and St. Paul Public Schools. The remaining 80% comes from other government sources, including ARPA funding, state deed grants, community, CDBG, and HRA resources, as well as Ramsey County Workforce Solutions. This diversified funding approach has allowed us to grow and serve more young people, but also creates challenges. Much of the funding is time-limited, competitive, or tied to specific grant opportunities. So as we think about the future of youth employment in St. Paul, this slide highlights the importance of developing sustainable funding strategies to reduce reliance on temporary sources and having consistent opportunities for young people. This is what I was talking about before, the breakdown of how we spend our funding. So again, majority does get allocated directly to young people, with 59% of all program expenses supporting youth wages, ensuring participants are compensated for all of their work, whether it's an internship or a training experience. All experiences are paid through Right Track. Nearly 30% supports full-time staff who recruit youth, develop employer partnership, provide trainings, and manage program operations year-long. 9% support seasonal job coaches. Our largest program component does take place during the summer. So this summer with 500 interns, we have about 10 job coaches joining us. And just over 2% is allocated to other services and materials. So the most important takeaway for this is majority of our funding, again, is invested directly into youth through earned income and work-based learning experiences. So already in 2026, $320,000 in wages have been earned by St. Paul youth through Right Track experiences. And this is our spring experiences and our school year experiences. Most of our summer experiences are launching next week. A couple have already started. And through our employer partnerships, we anticipate leveraging about $500,000 in employer-paid experiences this year. And so it really demonstrates the opportunities. It demonstrates that city investment not only creates opportunities directly, but also attracts additional private and public investments for young people. Next, we'll discuss some of our challenges and budget risks that we're currently facing. So this slide highlights some of the difficult decisions we've made this year and are making moving forward due to declining funding. So there are several key factors that have contributed to some of these changes. We're currently navigating about $100,000 less in DEED Youth at Work funding. DEED is our largest funder at this point for state fiscal year 2026 and 2027. Rising minimum wage requirements continue to be challenging to offer the same amount of experiences. And ARPA funding is ending, leaving about 6.3 full-time positions unfunded after 2026. So these positions support critical functions, including youth services, program administration, employer engagement, and more. So at the same time, the demand for our opportunities continues to rise. So the funding challenges that we've already had to make decisions on this year included ending our school year programming a month earlier. We reduced weekly hours for young people throughout this past school year. And we've also made the decision to eliminate the 2026-27 school year program. So these experiences also include internships with parks and libraries. And these experiences help young people build connections with trusted adults, develop a sense of belonging and strengthen public trust. Youth employment is not only a workforce strategy, it's often a public safety strategy that provides positive opportunities and earned income to young people in St. Paul. Additional decisions that have been made is we will not be offering a 2026 EMS program. Overall, between the summer and school year, it will be 300 fewer experiences for St. Paul youth. All right, now real briefly discuss the importance of the training wage. So Right Track internships are intentionally designed as a training experience, not traditional employment. It's important to note when we talk about the youth wages, Right Track does not use the 30-day youth wage. We exclusively use the training wage, similar to many programs around the country that operate in similar ways as us that Carla will talk about shortly. So the YJ1 program serves young people 14 to 19 and utilizes this training wage. These are entry-level learning experiences. Unlike traditional jobs, they include significant training and support. Youth receive workforce readiness and financial empowerment training and ongoing mentorship from job coaches. And it's important to note that these roles are not meant to replace staff, supplement operations, or pay youth less for doing the same work. They're intentionally structured as learning opportunities. If we were using the summer as an example and we were to lose our training wage, it would be $250,000 in expenses or 92 fewer experiences. So the bottom line is that youth wages makes it possible to create supported, high-quality experiences that would not otherwise exist. Preserving them expands access and ensures young people can participate in structured workforce learning opportunities. Next, Carlo is going to talk a little bit about some other programs similar to us.
Great. So we have the opportunity to partner with a national cohort through the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund that operates summer jobs programs across the U.S., really looking to integrate banking access, but also kind of best practices for youth employment programming. I currently serve on a kind of a sub-work group right now with Little Rock, Arkansas, Miami, Virginia Beach, and Detroit. And of this kind of small sample, each of them have a dedicated predictable revenue source that has been funding their program for years and years and years. In Little Rock, Arkansas, for an example, since 1980, they have been receiving funding from their violence reduction or violence prevention through the state legislature and through their city. So, but on comparable programs here, what you can see is that, and I mean, we've talked about our program. So St. Paul serving over 1,100 youth with a budget of about $3 million. Within that, we also have relied heavily on one-time limited funding sources, as Nardos mentioned, including ARPA and competitive grants. What you can see here, additionally, is the city of Minneapolis, right? We know they're about 100,000 population, greater than St. Paul, that they're served about 659 youth in traditional internship opportunities, and they also provide about 700 additional paid training opportunities, so they participate in some online professional development for a stipend at the end of that program. Let's see. So Boston, we know that is a larger city than St. Paul or Minneapolis, but what we see there is that they're serving over 10,000 young people per year with a over $33 million investment. What we also know is that almost $24 million of that comes from their city's general fund. And then they have another $10 million or so that is leveraged from external kind of private partners. But what we've seen, and we've actually had several conversations with Boston about their model, but they, the way that they're executing on that additional $10 million is really by public figures or elected officials that are really leveraging those relationships to really tell the need about how the summer jobs program is that critical for our city. And so I guess what I just want to emphasize is related to this program and some of the other examples I've provided about Little Rock or Miami or whatever is that, again, just emphasizing that these programs, for the most part, are operating off of predictable, sustainable revenue sources that they can predict year over year and don't necessarily shift. And just, I think, underscores a demonstrated need for continuing working together as a city to really find out how we can dedicate additional dollars to youth workforce programming in the near future. So how can we do this, and why should we kind of consider this? And so this is truly about investing in St. Paul's future, right? Our young people are currently part of our workforce, but they are going to be the ones to take care of all of us when we are no longer able to continue doing this work, and they're working in partnership with us as we work today. And so there's kind of three key priorities or three key items that we want to call attention to. One being just workforce development. So Right Track is really building the direct pipeline of young people, building those foundational work experiences. They're building their own individual skills. And we're providing a level of career exposure to young folks in our city that they may have never accessed independently. And so this really is how we're going to continue to build and prepare the workforce and making sure that our young people are competitive as they're seeking out these type of opportunities and really kind of bridging those workforce gaps now as young folks. So the other one is, another item here is economic mobility. So what we know about our program, and I say our program, but this is actually like more so commonly understood as in regards to youth workforce programming in general. But this is really giving and putting money in young people's hands today, right? $2.3 million earned last year. That is money that's going back into our young people's pockets. And truthfully, it's kind of a catalyst into kind of growing our local economy because our families are then expending those dollars in our city at local businesses that are accessible to them in their neighborhood. And so, but this is also, again, a proven strategy of increasing their long-term earning potential. And so kind of setting themselves up on a career path that will continue to expand as we move forward. And lastly, this is in cities across the country, a strong public safety strategy. what we see is that young people participating with strong mentorship, that they're engaged and busy during the summer, they're earning money in paid employment opportunities. What we see traditionally is about a 40% reduction in crime that studies would tell us nationally when there are strong workforce programs in the ecosystem. And then lastly, really briefly, the opportunity exists. Like, we have a strong interest from young people in St. Paul. We had more than 3,000 youth applications that have applied for about 700 opportunities that we have this summer. And there's continued interest. Since our application closed, we've had about 700 additional young people attempt to create an account in our application system. But again, we're not accepting additional applications at this time. And then lastly, I just want to highlight on here, we've done some data digging around and kind of comparing that to our income eligibility criteria. And what we know is that there's an estimated about 9,100 young people in our city that are income eligible for this program. What we also know, and that's of about 16,000 high school age young people in our city. What we also know is that based on barriers to employment and other program qualifiers, we would have about 11,000 young people out of the 16,000 in our city that would be eligible for the program. And in 2024, we were able to serve about 13% of income eligible youth in St. Paul.
All right, we will close this out real quick with our 4 strategies for sustainability. The first is increased public sector engagement. This means all city departments are hosting interns and budgeting to host those interns. This looks like increased dedicated city funding, prioritizing our college internship program, the Scholars Program, for existing internship pipelines that exist across the city. The second being a private sector partnership. We need to leverage existing city relationships to bring in more employers. So this includes setting clear expectations for city-affiliated businesses to engage and expanding partnerships with major institutions. For example, sports and entertainment venues downtown. Third being a sponsorship model. Often we do run into instances where we see buy-in and interest, but they aren't able to actually host interns due to other policies or whatever it may be. So we'd love to develop a sponsorship model in which employers, local businesses can invest in internship experiences, can invest in training experiences, and still be tied to that work without hosting interns. And then, of course, sustainable funding strategy with diversifies our funding sources, so the program is more stable long-term and less reliant on changing funding and bringing more public and private funders to elevate youth workforce development. So we will wrap it up there. Additional opportunities to engage, and we appreciate you all having us here today and are happy to answer questions.
Actually, before they wrap up, I just have a few more things to say. Erica Prosser, Deputy Director of Parks and Recreation. I just wanted to quickly say, these two they're extremely humble about the work that they do and the work that our teams do. But I wanted to point out that in many cases we have been nationally recognized for the work that our program does. For example, Carlo mentioned the cohort that he's working on for financial empowerment. That we are extremely honored to have Carlo serve in that capacity, but also to be asked to participate with these programs around the country that are doing such impactful work. So I want to thank you guys for that. They mentioned it a few times in the course of the presentation, but I want to make a particular emphasis on the violence prevention work. The public health model for addressing youth violence, it relies heavily on that intervention work and reintegration work. If you're talking to your constituents about what can we do about these kids, these kids in our neighborhood, we can get them jobs. That's a big piece of it. And it's not just a job, it is a meaningful work experience. We have, you know, you have small businesses in all of your wards that are willing to host intern, you know, to have youth work at their businesses, but they may not have the infrastructure to host, you know, to host those interns. We can do payroll, we can onboard them, and then we also provide this very important professional development that comes along with it. How do you fill out your, you know, how do you fill out that paperwork? What, you know, what does that mean? The financial empowerment strategies that go along with it. You know, what do you do with your, you know, savings account? How do you set up a bank? All, you know, all those things. So that is such a key strategy for violence prevention in our community, and the more we can invest in it, you know, the better. I also want to say, you guys play such an important role in how we can expand this program. We will always have limited resources in the city, and you have to make very difficult decisions about where you're investing those. But we have employers that can pay the wages, and you can be recruiters. We will provide you with the information that you need to hand, you know, every community meeting that you go to, every business that you're meeting with, you know, you should have, we think that you should have Right Track information, be able to talk about our program just like you're, you know, part of our team. And we would be grateful for that support. Yeah, I think given the time, that's kind of what I wanted to say, but thank you guys, and thank you to this team.
Well, thank you, Deputy Director. Appreciate you, and also to Carlo and Nardos, thank you for working with the time that you were given and just kind of going through the slides. This has been a constant topic. Folks are really interested, like throughout the presentation, there actually were several hands that we're not going to get through today, so I expect to actually have several follow-ups. All two will have follow-up questions for you all, just really around, you know, the amounts. I think one of the things that we are interested in is like getting getting a clear view picture of the financial impacts of the program. So when you share, like, these are the changes, you know, that we have made, it's really understanding the dollar amounts affiliated with them, the breakdowns of the funding. You know, the funding is great by percentage, but numbers are better. And I think just being able to get a clear view picture of the program, especially when it comes to the tough decisions that we all have to make, I think it's going to be really important to understand that clearly, and dollar amounts, and what funding you have, what funding you don't have, what funding we would need to sustain the numbers that we have, you know, who makes decisions on what is not continued, what is changed, like just those pieces. I think those will be really helpful, I think, in the coming weeks ahead for those conversations as well, because quite a few of the sources, you know, are either at term expiration, or they are one-time funding, or they're ongoing. So just we'll have some follow-ups for you, because yes, throughout the presentation I saw several hands, and so we'll be able to follow up with you all too with just kind of what we've heard too from our colleagues, and you'll probably get that email from Kamud.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. I didn't realize that tree canopy was going to be such a hot topic with a bunch of questions through it. So we wanted to make time for that, but it's not to signify that this isn't just as important. For a reminder, both items received pretty much unanimous support for the council. And so we're featured in the budget memo. So it's something that, like, we are just starting to have these, you'll see budget topics that have related to our budget retreat that received 5 or more council members and support. So that's kind of what the next couple budget committee presentations will be. With that, I apologize for going over a little bit. I try not to do that. We are adjourned.